Welcome to Windows on the World, and what a show we've got for you tonight. We're going to have Mr. Piers Corbyn a bit later on, and also something that I've been meaning to talk about for a very long time in the first part of the show. We used to do a lot of shows on ancient history and the intervention theory. Now, we did several really interesting interviews with the late Lloyd Pye. Lloyd Pye was a researcher into hominids, and he wrote several books, one of which was called Intervention Theory. Now, the interviews we did with Lloyd were extremely interesting, and they are available at windowsontheworld.net. In fact, we did an interview with Lloyd just before he died a few years ago, and it's called A Tribute to Lloyd Pye. So, along with Lloyd's work, we're going to be discussing the bigger picture, because that's what we do on the show, the bigger picture of what is known as evolution, what is now known as intervention theory. In other words, the idea that the present Homo sapiens sapiens were somehow genetically altered or manipulated. And this is reflected in the fused chromosome that we have. Very interesting stuff, but over the years we've covered what is known as this intervention theory, literally the genetic manipulation of humans. So the present dominant species, sapiens sapiens, came out of nowhere around 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapiens is a fused chromosome which is unique. Now, the Denisovans originally were found in Siberia, in a cave in Siberia. This is this other subspecies, and the Denisovans did appear to have interbred with different versions of us. This is what we're going to be talking about. And also, we have Neanderthal DNA in Europeans. It's not really found in Africans, but in Europeans, I think it's about 4% of Europeans have Neanderthal DNA. So it does indicate that there was cross-species interbreeding. Now, the out of Africa theory that human life originated out of Africa around 400,000 years ago it's a bit further back than that, but what I was getting to was that the out of Africa theory has been replaced by the out of Australia theory. In other words, that life came out of Australia about 400,000 years ago, and it's indicated by the research of people like Stephen and Evan Strong in Australia, and also the people who came up with the out of Africa theory, that ancient Australia is actually one of the most ancient civilizations on the planet. Now, we already know that, well, it's indicated that there was trading between the Australians, or the indigenous people who were there, whoever they were, and the Egyptians. And you can find that in our previous shows with Stephen and Evan Strong. Their website is forgottenorigin.com. Now, as we said, there are many subspecies, but no missing link. This is really important. So when we're talking about Darwinian evolution, we have to look at this very objectively. And if we've got time, I have an audio that I wanted to play, but I'm going to introduce a guest tonight, somebody who I've been in contact with for a while, and also our work sort of cross-pollinates and crosses over, and we have a lot in common, but we've never actually really spoken on a show before, and that's Clive from Free Critical Thinking. We're going to speak to Clive in a few minutes. But yes, this is the most important thing, that there are different types, but nothing which proves evolution. Now, people go, well, surely evolution's been proven. Well, actually it hasn't. What we're looking at, though, is these subspecies and these different types. It goes back into an ancient red-headed race who were around 6 to 7 feet tall, go back about 25,000 years. These seem to be widespread across America and South America, and also many other places. For instance, let's think about China. The mummies of China, these were giants. These were 6 to 7 feet tall, not massive by our standards, but quite tall. And there seemed to be evidence of this sort of seafaring race that went around the world before we thought that was possible. So what we do on this show is we do get into the bigger picture. I'm going to get into talking to Clive now, and first of all get him to introduce himself. So Clive, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good evening, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
That's great. Hopefully we can do more of this, because our research does cross over, and the things that you cover, we cover, and we talk really about the bigger picture of social engineering as well. That's very important, and that ties into what we're going to be talking about. In other words, that to know where we are going and where we are at the moment, it is essential to have a bigger picture of the past. And the bigger picture of the past has been denied to us. I've been looking into it for years, and you come up against brick walls. However, what we do know is that there were ancient, very ancient advanced civilizations and megalithic cultures all over the world. The megalithic cultures had massive engineering skills, which we don't seem to have now. You can look at walls in Cusco in Peru. You can look all across South America, and even in Eastern Europe and Russia, you're going to find this. And also we have a great tradition of the standing stones all across Northern Europe, and that goes right into Normandy. And further, of course, in Malta, we've also got megalithic civilization going back 10 to 20,000 years. We've also got the stone circles extending actually into other countries now. They're being found in places where they weren't thought to be. In fact, what about Australia again? Yes, there have been stone circles found in Australia. So what's interesting about this is that in places like Australia, when farmers find these ancient sites on their land, they are inclined to bulldoze them or hide them, because the authorities then take the land back from them. This is another big problem. And yes, we're going to talk about all that and more in tonight's show. So, Clive, I was looking at your blog a few days ago, and you were getting into what is known as intervention theory and the sort of research that we've been talking about so far. How did you get into it?
Well, critical thinking is a group that's been trying to understand how the world works over the last 7 years. And we evolved through the sort of the political economy and how that works, and we've come down to essentially three essential floors or pillars on which this political economy is built. One is usury, which facilitates the creation of money out of nothing and transferring wealth from the poorest to the richest. The second is theft of the commons, so land, resources, knowledge, all of the things that should belong to us in common. And then the final leg of the stool of our oppression, for want of a better way of putting it, is this notion of hierarchy, that somebody rules over us. And clearly it's the hierarchical institutions which have created so much competition and conflict in the world. And our contention is that if we did away with hierarchy in the other two floors, then we could self-organise a much better society. Those are very, it took us 2 or 3 years, possibly 4 years to come to that conclusion. But it's really in the last 2 or 3 years that we've begun to look at how hierarchy has evolved and how we actually implement those changes in the face of such an enormous power that everybody subscribes to, this deference to authority and institutions. And so it's when we started exploring hierarchy and we started looking at astrotheology and how, if you look at a lot of the way we are governed, whether it be through religion or through politics or all the other institutions, there is a common sort of thread that stems from the cosmic world, the astrological charts. And then when you start looking at our origins and you notice that there are increasingly threats to the evolutionary biology story, then you come across artifacts like the pyramids and the various other structures. And I think you and I, we posted something on Michael Challenger recently, and the idea of the mining gold, the Anunnaki mining gold in South Africa. Then you begin to see that there is possibly something beyond our existing understanding as to where this hierarchy originated. It may not have originated within our accepted evolutionary context, which is, up until recently, is how critical thinking had framed the evolution of hierarchy, was that you had kings and then you had bankers. But actually, when you think about the psychology of hierarchy and the heavy influence that religion and theocracy plays, then we need to be looking beyond that. And these, as I said when we spoke previously, we're in a period of negative discovery, where every new discovery creates more questions than it answers. And that's really how we've got into it. So, unlike you, who've been researching this stuff for years, this is fairly new territory for us at critical thinking, and me personally. But I do see that it's very key in how we overcome this sort of barrier of ignorance, which is basically premised on this idea that the world is the way it is because human nature, and our understanding of human nature comes from evolutionary biology, which is sort of dog-eat-dog competition, survival of the fittest. What that ignores, and there's copious evidence in evolutionary biology, is that we are a co-creative species like many other manifestations of living organisms on the planet, be they plants or insects, whatever. Cooperation seems to be key to survival, and we see it in the animal kingdom. And obviously there are exceptions, and we tend to put sort of anthropomorphic identities on animals. In other words, we regard their psychology as being the same as ours, and obviously theirs is quite different. And discoveries like those of Lloyd Pye and other people would suggest there's a very good reason that we're very different, because we don't come from the same stuff, as it were.
Yeah, you've raised some very good points there, and when I do my talks, I start off with a quote from the late Charles Fort, who was a researcher, compiled all of these strange, anomalous events that he found in small local newspapers in America. And he made some great quotes. One of them is, "The earth is a farm. We are someone else's property." Now, everything that we are assumed to be within the system assumes us to be property, which is very interesting. So there's different levels of hierarchy. When you get to this level of, is it off-planetary, some people turn off, but when you look at the earth, it's in an absolutely perfect part of the universe. It has intelligent design, and when you look at the way it's controlled, it is managed like a business. This is the best way of looking at it. It's managed like a business plan. So you've got people who are in charge. You've got administrators who are useful idiots who get put into these positions because they've gone through an education system which teaches them all they need to know, and it makes them defend their own ignorance. Now, this is one of the key points I wanted to make, is that humans do seem to be devolving. Now, they are being devolved by being dumbed down. However, they are willingly letting themselves be devolved. Now, this to me indicates that the evolution idea doesn't seem to work, because if you've got people who will be subservient and will constantly follow orders and will constantly defend their own imprisonment mentally, financially, then there is something very fundamentally wrong. Now, I think it goes back into this fused chromosome and the DNA of what we actually are. And you brought up something really interesting, which was the Anunnaki. Now, these were sort of gods, basically. They came out of these Sumerian texts, and you had Enki and Enlil and the whole hierarchy of these gods. And you look into what they were talking about when they get into this stuff, and it is about a hierarchy, but it's also about control and genetic manipulation of human beings. And I want to get into some of these quotes a bit later in the show. But first of all, I think we should start off with a little introduction to all this, because I recorded this some time ago and it's about 12 minutes long, so me and Clive can chat along and you can go in ahead in chat. I know people are actually talking about completely different things in there, which is great because that's what we usually have. But this is all about intervention theory and Darwinian evolution. Present some of the late Lloyd Pye's research. Now, Lloyd presented a talk called Everything You Know Is Wrong, which you can find on YouTube. Now, Lloyd wrote several books, one with that title and one called Intervention Theory, which runs along with ancient and biblical references which indicate that we may have been the product of intervention and genetic manipulation. Now, the fused chromosome in Homo sapiens sapiens does raise this question. Here is the recent show we did presenting some of these ideas. So first of all, let's go into Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, and very importantly, the original title of his work, which is known as The Origin of Species. The original title was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Now, this ties into the eugenics movement, which he was part of. The idea is that Darwinian evolution theory serves certain people on the planet. A little more background on the Darwinian claims. It was Lamarck who was best known for his theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, and this was presented in 1801. Darwin's first book dealing with natural selection was published in 1859. It states if an organism changes during life in order to adapt to its environment, those changes are passed on to its offspring. This is actually at the heart of Darwinism.
Darwinism is a theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin and others, stating that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small, inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive and reproduce.
Well, it's clear looking around that evolution isn't happening, and we are not even adapted to our own environment. On the Origin of Species, we need to look at the title for that. Originally titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Okay, so let's have a look at this.
During his time as the ship's naturalist aboard the Beagle from 1831 to 1836, Charles Darwin had the opportunity to study the wildlife of the Galapagos Islands. On the islands, he was amazed by the great diversity of life. Most particularly, he took interest in the island's various finches, whose beaks were all highly adapted to their particular lifestyles. He hypothesized that there must be some process that led to such diversity and adaptation, and he spent much of his time trying to puzzle out what the process might be. After returning from his voyage, bringing with him numerous dead finches killed and stuffed at his behest, and at the urging of friends, Darwin put his thoughts into writing in a 490-page abstract that he entitled On the Origin of Species. Now let's look at our original title, and it'll give you a bit of a clue. Originally titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. That's us, by the way, of course, not you.
As stated, this fits perfectly into the eugenics movement and the belief in an elite who would like to think that they are where they are because of natural selection, rather than ruthless and long-term cunning and manipulation. So getting back to Darwin and his implausible but useful control system for an assumed elite to use against the population as a cover story for their groundless assumptions.
The public reception of Origin was phenomenal. Within 15 years it was well accepted that evolution did occur the way Darwin said, slowly and in small steps. However, the mechanism of natural selection remained difficult to accept at the time because there were many points Darwin himself admittedly could not explain. For example, he knew that traits were passed down from parents to offspring, but he did not know how this happened. It was not until the early 1900s, when the field of genetics became the focus of intense study, that Darwin's mechanism of natural selection received more intense scrutiny and deeper scientific support. With the discoveries of genetics, Darwin's theories gained a scientific basis beyond observation and were consequently accepted as a plausible mechanism for evolutionary change. Even before the genetics arrived on the scene, the idea of survival of the fittest captured the imagination of the public. The idea was applied to everything from the business world to the structure of society as a whole. Okay, so let's go into some of his theories. Common descent. Common descent. Darwin felt that all the diversity of life on Earth emerged out of the evolution from one of a few common ancestors. This theory took a step beyond Lamarck's observation that complex creatures probably evolved from simpler ones. The idea was also socially important. It implied a less important role for humans as merely one of many branches in the animal world, rather than a separate, privileged lineage as formerly assumed. Well, of course, we are privileged and we are the privileged lineage, but don't tell them that. Again, for those assuming superiority, getting the gullible public to accept being soulless drones engaged in lifelong slavery. This theory worked a treat. It also made them compete and concentrate on trivia rather than the bigger picture seen by those who benefited from this clever manipulation. This taken up by consent of the useful idiots in science and education, programming the worker drones with it. It worked brilliantly as a controlling mechanism. So let's go on to another of his theories. Gradualism. While Lamarck felt that species-wide change could take place within the span of a few generations, Darwin felt evolution was a much slower process, taking place in innumerable small steps. Based on this and on the ideas of the Scottish geologist Sir Charles Lyell, he estimated the world to be much older than contemporary geological theories accounted for. Okay, let's go on to the next bit of his theory, population speciation. This portion of Darwin's theory states that within a population, change in a species occurs as the balance of hereditary characteristics shifts across that population. This differs from Lamarck's idea that each individual in the population must undergo the same change. According to Lamarck, all giraffes living under tall trees would develop long necks. According to Darwin, some would randomly be born with long necks. This hereditary trait would gradually spread throughout the population. Now, this is very true because my neck is much, much longer than my mother's. Well, this has no foundation evidence whatsoever, as a short-necked giraffe does not and has never existed and will never exist, and a horse is not a giraffe. Let's go to natural selection. Natural selection is often called the most unique part of Darwin's theory. Competition, also called the struggle for life, had been thought of as a reason that a given species might succeed or go extinct. But Darwin extended the understanding to change within a species. To continue the example of giraffes, when a giraffe is born with a longer neck than its fellows, it gains an advantage because it is able to reach more food. The long-necked giraffe is therefore stronger, lives longer, and more likely to have offspring. These offspring are born with the same long necks as their parent, though some might even have longer necks, a bit like myself. The cycle continues. The theory of natural selection depends on 5 postulates. So when has a giraffe been born with a longer neck? And if it has, why would it back up his theory? So let's recap on this. Okay, so quick recap. Individuals are variable, some variations are passed down, more offspring are produced than can survive, survival and reproduction are not random, the history of Earth is long. The theory of evolution states that evolution happens by natural selection. The key points are that individuals in a species show a wide range of variation. This variation is because of differences in their genes. Individuals with characteristics most suited to the environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. The genes that allow these individuals to be successful are passed to their offspring. Good example, I used to do my own gardening and now I employ someone to do it. That's natural selection. It means I'm superior and I get on with things of far greater importance. The problem with this is that the entire human race have never adapted to their environment. They are way below primates in their ability to survive in their natural habitat. Let's have a look at the Natural History Museum. Now this keeps the programme going. You walk in past Darwin to the Kiddies Gallery of Human Evolution, going past ape-like humans and then the rather diminutive but half ape, half not really human Lucy. So why does this Darwinian evolution fit in with eugenics and an elite ruling class? It actually benefits them and we buy into it. We are told that the universe is approximately 14 billion years old. We are told that the Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Evolution theory states prokaryotes appear and produce oxygen. 2 million years later, eukaryotes appear and start producing more oxygen. Blue-green algae appears. 2 billion years ago, ice appeared. Prokaryotes started absorbing eukaryotes. The oxygen built an ozone layer to block out UV light. Life exploded 550 million years ago in the Cambrian period. Algae developed into all plant forms. Primates appear in the Miocene period, 5 to 23 million years ago. It is stated that 3 to 2 million years ago there is a transition to us, Homo habilis, which is nothing like us. 2 million years ago we get Homo erectus. Neanderthals appear approximately 300,000 years ago. 30 to 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal goes extinct. 60,000 years ago, Cro-Magnon appears. Homo sapiens appear at around 200,000 years ago. In 1996, it was concluded that Neanderthals and modern-day humans do not share enough mitochondrial DNA, that's DNA from the mother. The out of African theory is another childlike idea. Africans carry no Neanderthal DNA. Non-Africans, though, carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. The Denisovans are another species found in Siberia. Their DNA is found in 5% of Melanesians, also in New Guinea, Fiji and the Pacific Islands. So these so-called primitive hominids can walk better than us, see better and are adapted to their environment. Their bones are thicker, their joints don't wear out easily like ours, they are 5 to 10 times stronger and their offspring are ready to go pretty much as soon as they are born. Their knees point slightly in and they have a wider pelvis, which makes them much more adapted to walking, and they have less strain on their joints. Darwin's evolution theory does not make sense. Hominids do not need to cut their hair or nails, their hair does not keep growing. Hominids can eat and breathe at the same time, but they cannot speak. Humans have 4,000 genetic disorders and new ones are found regularly. Hominids have 24 chromosomes from each parent, making 48. Humans have 23, making 46. Humans have insertion of 233 genes not found in any other animal species, which are of no selective advantage, which does not support the evolution theory. Modern humans can mate with hominids, known as almas, and produce human offspring. So how adapted are we to our environment? We catch numerous common diseases, colds and flu, and immunity has to be built into the individual for serious diseases. This goes into the royal bloodlines who are immune to bubonic plague. This ties into genetic manipulation through the gene pool, and the belief in the bloodline of the gods, the Watchers. These are the antediluvian god kings and Nephilim who inbred with humans.
Yes, I'm going to leave it there. That actually goes on for another 14 minutes, and it's something that I prepared much earlier. I've been waiting to do this show for quite some time, and I am going to put up that interview with Stephen Strong that we did several months ago. It's really interesting, and we talked there a bit about Neanderthals and also, of course, Denisovans. Now, I'm just going to read this out and we can discuss it over the next few minutes. This is from grahamhancock.com, and it was an article that he posted a few months ago. And it states, nuances arriving out of contemporary research of the human genome begin to sound esoteric. Archives of ancient DNA teased out of fossils have revealed unknown subpopulations or ghost tribes of ancient human groups, species long vanished from the face of the earth, but who continue to unfold in us, their modern human descendants. The discovery of substantial remnants of Denisovan DNA within Melanesian, indigenous Australian peoples, in addition to a more elusive clash detected within Native American populations, has contributed new initiatives to the sat-nav of genetic migration and to a possible cultural memory following those same trails. Broadly speaking, and for the sake of convenience, Denisovans were the Asian equivalents of European Neanderthals at the genomic level. Denisovans have widened the puzzle of human behaviour and evolution from what was allowed by the conventional model only a few decades ago, as genetic analysis shows that a three-way interbreeding between Denisovans, Neanderthals and atomically modern humans has occurred. Now this is really interesting, and of course this information is changing all the time. We have to also remember that it's incredibly difficult to make fossils. Fossils of humans are very, very rare indeed, or fossils of hominids are very, very rare indeed. Now we're going to talk about the sort of priest class element in all this, because as we said at the beginning of the show, there does seem to be something off-planetary directing all this, because if you look at what's happening and the devolution of human beings and the way that people are willingly being devolved and subverted in every possible way, in other words, to their detriment in the respect that they are being wiped out. Certain populations are being wiped out, and whether we see this through the eyes of the UN Global Action Plan, or we see it as what's called cultural Marxism, or just degeneracy and the dumbing down of population, ideological subversion basically, then it doesn't really matter. But it means that there is some kind of agenda to keep the human race where they are, and they are subservient. They act as slaves, they willingly pay taxes, they are willingly corralled, and that's what the bigger picture of what we talk about in our talks. The bigger picture is how people are being herded into megacities, the smart city agenda, all the rest of it. All of this is a type of slavery. Now, what did you make of all that, Clive? Are there any comments you'd like to make after listening to the audio? I know we were chatting through some of it.
Well, I think it speaks to itself, and you summarised it very, very well. The local agenda or the global agenda that's been applied locally, both you and I have converged on this subject over recent months and years. The strong cities global goals, which will atomise nation states and make them subservient to a central authority and all the other things. But there is another strand, because part of the sort of global agenda is this so-called sustainable development agenda. And if you look back to the 1992 UNCED conference, UNCED, although I think UNCED is probably more accurate, there was Morris Strong, Rockefeller and Rothschild, who were discussing the creation of basically a global nature reserve. And that's where the idea of carbon credits first emerged, because it was announcing the establishment of the Rothschild Bank specifically to manage the business of carbon credits. So all of these things sort of dovetail in together. And when you look at it in the wider context of our evolution and what we're led to believe, it is this idea that if you look at Lloyd Prime's theory, the Anunnaki basically created us to mine gold for them, because they needed gold to repair their atmosphere or Nibiru, ostensibly. But if you think about it, this idea of us being farmed, as you say, is evident in the way in which we are treated as property. From the time we are born and our birth is registered, there is a value put on us, and that's basically the lifeblood of the system, that it's by farming human beings.
Yes, and of course the assumed priest class, the bloodlines, the Davidic bloodline, all this goes into an idea of divinity. And when I've talked to some of these people who assume this bloodline, and there are still quite a lot of them around, whether they are right or wrong, in my opinion, I think it's a huge deception, but it is a belief. There is an absolute obsession with genetics and bloodline, which actually ties into what you were just talking about. In other words, what the priest class, the watchers, the Nephilim were the offspring of these so-called Watchers or Anunnaki. We can go into different versions of this, and there are many, including the Popol Vuh, which is the South American text, which is actually really, really interesting, because it states in the Popol Vuh that the gods would make a man to sustain and nourish us. We're going to get into some more of those quotes a little bit later. But I find this incredibly interesting, because what we talk about is the access to education and knowledge. Knowledge is everything, and the priest class keep all the knowledge for themselves, and it's at many different levels. So basically we have this huge administration class, we have the serfs underneath, and we have the elite at the top. And most people act as gatekeepers for their own enslavement. Another point I wanted to bring up: why are human beings willing to act as gatekeepers for their own enslavement? There's a huge amount of fear about this, and it's not just fear as in religious fear. It's a general fear of authority which is instilled in us from the day we're born. As you were saying, we have to be registered at birth. Birth, Deaths and Registration Act, meaning your property. You can be represented as a piece of property. So that is slavery, indentured slavery. That's all it is. And most people will turn around and go, well, I'm not a slave. I've got my own house. I've got a car. But this doesn't actually mean anything, because in the system we can't own anything. And I think the biggest part of this knowledge that people are denied is that they have an immortality that they can actually tap into. It seems to me, through most of my research, that the ultimate knowledge is that of being able to leave the body and project the consciousness. In other words, leave the body behind and become sort of immortal, as in the out-of-body experience. This is another angle of it. And what I've found in talking to people who really study this stuff is that that does seem to be the ultimate aim of the elite. I'm not talking about globalists here and bankers. I'm talking about the real elite, the people who actually have a deep understanding of this stuff. And in fact, I wrote out a document which was from the point of view of the Watchers, and that's another really interesting aspect that we can get into as this show goes along. But we're almost running out of time already. We've got like 20 minutes left. But I think this idea of social Darwinism is incredibly important, and one of the most important aspects of the whole thing, because Darwin underpinned this. And you heard what the original title of Origin of Species was in that audio clip, and it really ties into this eugenics movement, which is an assumed priest class. So we have this sort of aristocracy, an assumed priest class, who at some point tie that back to a belief in a Davidic bloodline. In other words, a bloodline that might go back to Jesus. Now, when you look into this stuff, it's very, very prevalent in the so-called secret societies, the Knights of Malta, etc. They really believe in this stuff. And once you get into the next level of it, the genetic modification, in other words, the Watchers and the Nephilim, they really believe it. Now, some of these Bible quotes are absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to get onto those in a minute. But back to you, Clive. What do you think about all that?
Well, what you were talking about in the early stages very much resonates with other work that we've come across in critical thinking. There's a group that is exploring something which they term natural inclusion, but there are many different strands of philosophy that converge on the same thing, as does quantum physics. And this is the idea that, what are we? We're not actually matter. We're not made of stuff. We're made of vibrating energy within receptive space. And although we're unique instances of that energy, we are interconnected with the whole of the universe. So we're interconnected with each other and with the planet and with the universe. And this is why stellar and planetary movements are quite important in terms of our understanding of our place in the world and how astrotheology is used to manipulate it. But it comes back down to what you were saying about our own power. That we are ruled, as you say, primarily through fear of death. And when you recognise, irrespective of your religion, when you recognise that you are actually a conscious instance of energy in the universe, which is autonomous but interdependent with everything else, then you lose your fear of all these things that we shy away from, because, we won't talk about aliens, or we won't talk about anti-Semitism, or whatever it may be. We lose those fears because we realise that actually we're far more powerful than we think. And just tapping back into the Anunnaki story, we've all heard that we only use a fraction of our brain capacity, and there's quite a lot of evidence that somewhere in our ancestry we had powers way beyond those that we exhibit today. And Lloyd Pye's interpretation is that we were made clever enough to mine gold and organise life on the planet, but we weren't to be given any more than that, and that's why so many pairs in our DNA we either don't understand, or they're switched off, or don't work. But this has been deliberately engineered.
Really good points there, and also this ability of telepathy, which I believe has been shut down. I think that these superior beings had telepathy and would communicate like that. There was no need for language. Now that's incredibly important if you want to communicate quickly in real time. In other words, thoughts travel at the speed of whatever. they travel.
Well, I think there is evidence in the animal kingdom of telepathy.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You hear stories of pets walking to the gates because their master's coming home, when they would have no way of knowing. They haven't been told or whatever, but they just sense it. So, and there are many instances like that.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, that's a very good point. Yeah, animals do have these heightened senses, but so do we. And what's interesting about it is that this can kind of be opened up. So this is why I think we've been shut down. We get a glimpse into that when we do see the bigger reality. I was at an event the other day, and there was a chap there, and he had this experience which I've heard from a lot of people. In other words, they became absolutely infinitely aware of everything at the same time, almost like they call it a download of information. But what goes along with that is an absolute understanding of everyone and everything around them, and it's all in real time. What we seem to be struggling with, well, I seem to be struggling with it all the time, is the difference between what's actually going into my consciousness and what I can actually explain. This is a really difficult thing because we've got such limitations with language. Now, of course, the so-called elite are taught how to use language properly, logic, grammar, rhetoric, the trivium method of thinking, all of these things. But all they're doing is sharpening up the tools of this particular way of communication. And once you get beyond that, then it starts to get much more simple, but in actual fact much more profound. So all that stuff I think is really important. And I talked to somebody a few years ago about the sort of spiritual side, if there is one, of the Knights Templar, the poor knights of the money temple. Well, sure. There was a suggestion that the octagonal towers were used to try and induce out-of-body experiences. I've no idea whether this is true. It's just a supposition. But the point is that this stuff is incredibly important once you get higher up. In other words, the higher up you go, the more people want to connect with this stuff, and the more they know about it, and the more, in fact, magic becomes part of it. I'm not talking about forced black magic and all this sort of stuff, this Freemasonic stuff we've talked about in the past, but I'm talking about the ability to manifest things and just get on with them. Now, the thing is that if these superior intelligences can do this, it would make absolute sense, because you would not have any obstacles put in the way of pure intelligence. It just wouldn't happen. But what we are trapped in is this kind of network of negativity which is imposed from all angles, and every single outlet that we get information from is negative pretty much. The only thing that's positive are things that are absolutely banal, and that's meant to cheer us up. So the actual dumbing down process is pretty complete, but I'd just like to read out a few of these quotes. Of course, first we're going to start with Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And this is really interesting stuff because it ties into, of course, the Watchers and the Nephilim. And of course, the Rephaim were meant to be in charge of Palestine for about 1,000 years. These were these huge, fearsome warriors which were meant to be the offspring of the Nephilim, who inbred with the daughters of men. And they were wiped out by Enoch. And they were meant to be trapped in the earth and never to be released and cursed. And that's in the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is incredibly interesting because he gets this rocket ship ride to go meet Michael and Gabriel, I think, the archangels. And he's instructed on how to get rid of the Nephilim, who'd taken over the earth and ravaged through everything. And they were cannibals, they were murderers, etc. And they had to be wiped out. But the Book of Enoch is incredibly weird because it starts off with this trip into meeting these angels and getting all these instructions on how to deal with the Nephilim. Then, in the middle, it all seems to go into a bit about Israel. Then, at the end, it's just a series of curses against all of these different entities. But there's no real conclusion to it. It's a very, very strange book. It's almost as though it's 3 different parts that have been put together. So I don't think that's accurate. But we've also got the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which were found in around 1947, a long time, about the same time as the Dead Sea Scrolls, actually. But the Nag Hammadi I've read from cover to cover. But there is this same kind of obsession with a control system being put in, a very negative kind of energetic field being imposed on people, and the whole idea is to get beyond that. So this early kind of Essene and Christian knowledge seemed to be about that. So yes, it says, here shall stand in many different appearances the spirits of the angels, which have united themselves with women. They have defiled the people and will lead them into error, so that they will offer sacrifices to the demons as unto gods, until the great day of judgment, in which they shall be judged till they are finished. Enoch 19:1. The Nag Hammadi scriptures, origins of the world, the creation of humankind. This is fascinating. If you do not want him to be able to ruin our work, let us create a human out of the earth in the image of our body and with a likeness to this being to serve us. Then he will fall in love with his likeness. Then he will no longer ruin our work, and we shall make the children of the light our slaves for this entire age. That's one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard, and ties in to this idea that we are merely being farmed and controlled as slaves. Have you ever heard of that, Clive, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, that particular quote?
This is an area, again, which I know very little, but having said that, when you think about the destruction of the library at Alexandria, there was a huge amount of ancient knowledge of which we're unaware. And earlier you were talking about the structures with the engineering skills. They have they appear to have a very different sort of technology, which is capable of far more of what we are capable of with our technological sophistication. And it's built around this idea of sound waves. And sound wave technology seems to be the basis of the civilization that created us. And if you start looking at the work of Nikola Tesla, then you begin to find that falls into focus with the same idea. But you asked the question earlier about our dumbing down and how can this be? And if you think about the way in which everything is handled, it's all compartmentalized and all information is abstracted. So you talked about at the top of organizations that there is all this secret knowledge. I think the Freemasons are probably a good example. You've got 33 degrees of Freemasonry. Everyone below the 30th degree believes they're doing good works and has a certain sort of belief set that complies with what everybody understands Freemasonry to be about. But above the 30th degree, they are privy to the sort of knowledge that you refer to. And this is replicated throughout the power structures. I don't know if you've looked at the work of Mark Passio, but he's done some incredibly good work on explaining how this manipulation and control is actually exercised.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we do go into that in the broader, bigger picture, the ideas of natural law versus administrative law, etc. These things are really important, and they're biblical, actually. But when he's talking about the Freemasons aren't actually a secret society. They call themselves a society with secrets. However, there are secret societies, but we don't know about them. And this is a really important point, because all of these so-called secret societies and things like the Knights of Malta, they're public. Anyone can join them if they get asked by a friend, basically. And Freemasonry is a kind of control system, really. It's a hierarchical control system, a bit like the one that's imposed on us, but they have a lot more power over the people who join. But I'd just like to finish off with a few more of these quotes, actually. This is from the Nag Hammadi scriptures again. The rulers of the world mould Adam. 7 archons have formed humanity with a body resembling their own body, but the likeness of humankind reflects the human being who appeared to them. Here's that quote from the Popol Vuh. Let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. So the race of giants produced from this union, the giants and the watchers, gave way to a brood of evil spirits. The evil spirits most likely are the departed spirits of the giants themselves. These spirits are not material or corporal beings, but they torment mankind because they are proceeded from them. According to Enoch 1, these spirits will not be punished until the day of judgment, in contrast to the watchers, who are punished both before and on the day of judgment. So this is interesting stuff, but it carries on. But now the giants who are born from the union of the spirits and the flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, because their dwelling shall be upon the earth and inside the earth. Because from the day that they were created from the holy ones, they became the watchers. Their first origin is the spiritual foundation. The spirits of the giants oppress each other. They will corrupt, fall, be excited, and fall upon the earth and cause sorrow. They eat no food, nor become thirsty, nor find obstacles. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of the people and against the women, because they have proceeded forth from them. That's Enoch 15. So let's get back to the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the wisdom of Jesus Christ, a good one to finish with, because it kind of gives a solution. It says, I have come from the first, who was sent to reveal to you the one who is from the beginning, because of the arrogance of the chief creator and his angels, for they claim to be gods. I have come to eradicate their blindness, that I might tell everyone about the God who is above all. In other words, take away the middleman. That's a really interesting point, and one that we talk about quite a lot, because obviously we had these things like the papal bull Unum Sanctum, which put the whole world into trust under the Holy Roman Empire in 1302. So this custodial idea isn't new, but the Roman Church were merely imitating it on behalf of their sponsors, really. Angie just put into chat, she said she was having trouble with Leviticus, I think. Angie says, I've only got as far as Leviticus and got bogged down from the begetting. Well, it is a bit hard work, but I replied to that with Leviticus is a cookbook for burnt offerings, which is basically what it is. You've got Yahweh demanding burnt flesh every chapter, and it's basically about how you are able to deliver up and cook things for Yahweh. It's absolutely incredible. But that sacrificial part of it, obviously, is a huge part of things. And I'll just kind of close with this. This is something I wrote called The Watchers, and I did it from their point of view. We have been here forever. We rule over you. You accepted this. We wish you no direct harm, neither do we need to engage with you. You have been genetically and thoroughly prepared and manipulated for your roles. Your roles are minor. We have made you proud of this. We have constructed a reality for you. This is necessary. We formed the endless infinity. This is beyond your capacity. You are quarantined. There is a custodial web around you. The planet and your entire reality was formed and owned forever by us. The web is for you complex, for us very simple. You have been given limited choices. You accepted them. You embraced them. The acceptance shows we are righteous and rule over you. This acceptance shows you are ruled and in our custody. Now it carries on. I wrote this quite long piece on it, which I'll probably put out actually, because it's all based on this information that I've gleaned over the years. So in conclusion, Clive, because we're going to speak to you a lot more about social engineering, tell us a bit about your website. We've got about 4 minutes.
Well, just before that, I think where we've got to in our analysis is that the only way that we're going to fight this system of control is by bypassing all the hierarchies and sharing this information and discussing it in circles of trust which interconnect. And I think that's really where we are at, that we cannot fight this force through the institutions that exist. We have to remove their power by withdrawing consent to dealing with it wherever we can and create our own new reality. And in terms of critical thinking, the website is freecriticalthinking.org. We meet 40 weeks of the year in London, and we do various other things, but we're also on Twitter at @FCriticalThink, that's F for free, Critical Think. You're welcome to take any of the material we produce. We hold no proprietary hold over anything we produce because we think that knowledge should be freely available to everyone. And if we can explore all these many and various complex issues collectively, different people have different interests, and we can filter down the information into a digestible form where we all begin to develop a common understanding of what actually happened, and then it becomes obvious what we need to do about it, which is basically do away with hierarchy and self-organize ourselves, because there is plenty of management theory to suggest that self-organization is far more effective than command and control, and self-organization is how nature works, and that's how we should work.
Absolutely, following natural law, which again is what is known by real hierarchy. And in conclusion, I would say that the people who rule over us from off planet state that we are infinity, we are beyond your understanding, your constructs of time and space have no meaning for us, and we are forever. Which I think is a very good place to leave it. That's a little introduction to a bit of intervention theory, which we've covered in the past. Do look at that. It's also an introduction to the work of Stephen and Evan Strong, who we've covered in the past. If you haven't heard of that stuff that they're doing in Australia, it's fascinating. The new Out of Australia theory, which is revolutionary in certain aspects. And of course, the migration patterns and the different types of hominids. We're going to be covering a lot more on that in the weeks to come. We've actually been covering mainly geopolitics for quite a long time, but to me this stuff is geopolitics in some ways, because it's the bigger picture of the bigger picture, and we'll be taking the bigger picture round to people who want to see it in different parts of the country. We're going to be back in 15 minutes. We're going to be back at 10:15. That's the end of this particular section of the show, and I'm going to play you out with our song, which is so prescient. This actually fits in perfectly to what we've been talking about, and it mentions the Anunnaki. So thanks a lot, Clive. We'll speak to you very soon, and we'll be back in 15 minutes.